I am definitely falling behind in terms of what's topical in the game industry. And about a month or so ago, with the height of The Last of Us 2, there were arguments about whether or not video games are too long. So for today's Critical Thought, we are going to answer that question. And it's yes. And no. Video game length has always been a very important topic, and it's been one that has changed a lot in the last 10 or so years. In the old days, it was considered a badge of honor to get extremely high game lengths. We're talking 80 to 100 hour long RPGs. The Witcher 3 taking who knows how long for some of you who have played it, and other major examples, especially in the AAA space. But with so many games being released daily and so many titles vying for your time, more and more consumers are coming around to this idea that less is more, and that it's better to have a superior 15-hour game as opposed to an average or middling 30 hours. And for this first part of this video, we're going to talk about why games can be considered too long. And one of the big examples, of course, is the open world genre, with games following the Upin style, or Ubisoft style, where the massive game space is simply there to stretch out and pad out what kind of content is going on. You're going to be basically focused on these tasks, but a lot of your time is going to be spent getting to said tasks. And a lot of titles, especially from the AAA space, tend to focus on the long-term play as opposed to the moment-to-moment, making what the player is doing, feel really great in their hands, making it enjoyable. And for a lot of these titles, they tend to go for, again, very wide, but not very deep game spaces. The antithesis would be something like what Arcane does with Dishonored, Prey, and so on and so on. And what we've been seeing, again, out of the AAA space is that when you're trying to fill these games with things to do, you can only do so much with the mechanics at hand. If your game is a third-person action title, well, you're going to basically be limited by how many ways you can challenge or change what the player is doing in each given arena. One of the things that kind of was a valid criticism of Doom 2016, I haven't played Doom Eternal yet, was that it did start to get a little bit repetitive. And again, repetitive can occur with even the best gameplay loops. Doom had a really solid gameplay, but the problem is that when you're doing that day in and day out, and there's no need to either break it up or really elevate it, it starts to become repetitive. And that's one of the things that we see from a lot of open world style games. That the core gameplay loop can be divvied down into maybe 4 or 5 different activities, which are then repeated ad nauseum for 20, 30, 40, 50 hours. Not only that, but if you're going for 100%, then you have to scour the entire map for every exact iteration of that. When I'm playing the game Man-Eater lately, they run into that same problem. Being the shark is really fun in that game. What's not fun is doing the same tasks in every area the same exact way, and not really getting anything to show for it. Now, Mad Max up there in the corner is one of the better examples of one of my favorite open world games, simply because so much focus was put on the general motion and, again, the moment-to-moment gameplay. When we did that cast with Tomo, talking about open world design, we discussed about how important it is to make that moment-to-moment feel right in the player's hands, because when it does, it can keep somebody invested in a game. If somebody's being annoyed at your title 5 minutes in, what's the chance they're going to stay 30, 50, 60 hours later? And it is very hard sometimes to know just how long a game should be. In my book that I wrote, Game Design Deep Dive on Platformers, I said that for a good platformer, that you can only go as long as you can keep changing things up and surprising the player. And that can certainly extend to AAA games and other genres. If you're just repeating the same situations, same enemy encounters, same quests, and nothing is really changing, then you have to end that game, or it's just going to feel like it's being padded out. And like I said, for the first part, that is why a lot of games feel like they're just too long. Yeah, you took down the stronghold. Now do it at 20 additional ones. You hit level 5. You're still, 90 levels away from the cap. And again, when the game, even the best feeling and best gameplay focused titles can still run into issues like this, that you're not really changing what is happening. It's the same that happened with me with Marvel Spider-Man, even with something like Sunset Overdrive. Both have really solid fundamentals in terms of their gameplay, but you're still just repeating the same thing. Even if you're in an ice environment, a fire environment, you're uptown, downtown, you're fighting on a river, whatever, if I'm still shooting the same enemies and they're still doing the same things to me, then all of that is just window dressing. And again, with something like Diablo, for instance, I've said this before, that I find in Diablo 3 the path from 1 to 70 being very enjoyable. But once I hit 70, and a lot of that progression loop goes away, you're not really left with anything else that's going to be considered meaty or interesting. And again, some people will grind that out. There are plenty of people who will, put their head down and just try to focus on getting a game finished. But again, you can't really rely on that as your sole metric of play. So, with that said, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to go to the other side of the equation and talk about how games can be considered too short, and how you can do a lot with very little. And now for a quick shout out to our current Game Wisdom supporters and sponsors. Going forward, all Patreon supporters will get early access to our videos. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, link down below. If you're looking for more wisdom about game design, be sure to check out my latest offering of books, 20 Essential Games to Study, aimed for first-time developers and students looking for some inspiration for their upcoming games, and Game Design Deep Dive Platformers if you're interested in anything regarding 2D and 3D platforming design. They're both available in print, digital, and wherever books are being sold. As we've talked about today, video game length can be very subjective based on the design of it. And while many AAA games tend to pad out their titles, that doesn't mean that you can't have long experiences, or more specifically, long gameplay loops. And I want to talk, of course, about a genre we've all come to know here on the channel, the roguelike genre, as a good example of this. Really great games are designed to hold the player's attention for hours at a time. At this point, I have over 100 hours in The Binding of Isaac. I know several of you watching this probably have close to 700 to 800 hours in that game. And again, with something like The Binding of Isaac and roguelikes in general, they are not designed around a long playthrough. Most of these games can have a single run end between 30 to 60 minutes at most. But the beauty of these kinds of designs, and why you can have a game that is long and still good, is that those playthroughs can be repeated almost indefinitely to provide multiple experiences and replayability. And this is not something that we see out of the AAA market. When we look at games like Assassin's Creed, pick any BioWare game. Again, I don't play too many AAA games these days, so I'm drawing a blank here on some of the more popular ones now. That their lengthier playthroughs are about taking a very small, very rigid core gameplay loop and padding that out, with all matter, again, of objectives, events, towers to climb, MacGuffins to collect, etc., etc. When we talk about games that are built on a very short but replayable core gameplay loop, that the gameplay is focused. You're not padding it out with additional content. Instead, the game is set up to accommodate for multiple playthroughs by changing what the player experiences without altering what the core gameplay is. As you can see with the footage of Hades here, we've been playing this game on and off for the better part of a year now. And with this game, what I am doing on each run is not changing. I am dashing, attacking, trying to get good. But what the game throws at me changes, and it's that difference that allows this game to be set up for something that you could play for several hundred hours, maybe even more if the game gets continued support, as we saw with something like The Binding of Isaac. And the point is that game length, for one thing, is not an automatic metric in terms of quality. It could have been this way 20-25 years ago, but today you're going to need to really explain your work as to why I should sit and play your game for an 80 to 100 hour playthrough. And games that tend to succeed really well today have a very focused core gameplay loop that, again, can be repeated and experienced differently over many playthroughs. So that, yes, with something like Hades here, I may only spend an hour per playthrough, but I could play this game for 100, 200, 300 hours and get completely different runs each time I play it. You can't do that in a game like The Witcher, or Assassin's Creed, or Marvel Spider-Man, or God of War, anything like that. Because even though those games are lengthy, they're not set up to accommodate for multiple playthroughs. Yes, you can change what your primary weapon is, or what skills you get access to, but if I'm still doing the same challenges, fighting the same enemies, completing the same story beats, then none of that matters. There is inherently one best way of playing those games. With a roguelike here, again, you are forced to adapt. Such as right here the footage that I'm fighting this boss for the very first time and getting my butt handed to me here. And again, that is the point of games that are really set up for amazing lengthy playthroughs. That I can keep playing Hades, just as I can keep playing Binding of Isaac, or Monster Train, or Slay the Spire, and continue to get new experiences. And that is why games can't necessarily be measured by length, because I have run out of steam playing 50, 60, 80, 100 hour long games, and then there are games that I am happy to spend hundreds of hours playing, but at 30-minute to an hour long sprints at a time. And that is what you need to think about as a developer when it comes to your core gameplay loop. What is the actual amount of length or value I can get out of it? And can this be something that can be repeated? And by repeated, I mean provide different experiences, not, again, just padding out with the same thing. Because as we've said before, one of the elements of good game design is knowing when to end, and knowing how much you can actually get out of these mechanics. If you can design mechanics that can be repeated for hundreds of hours, then you're golden. If you can really only get maybe 5-6 hours of content before you start repeating yourself, then that's all you can get out of it. And any attempt to try and stretch that out is, again, often met by lowering the quality of the game. So, with that said, to wrap things up for our piece, video game length is very subjective, and again, it is not the measure of the overall quality of a game. There are amazing games that could only be played in a few hours, and there are lousy games that have 80, 100, 200 hours of content in them. It all comes down to what the core gameplay is, and whether or not the game can explore all the aspects of it. Like we've said, like one of my favorite games lately was What the Golf. And this is a game that I could just keep playing more of, and the developers have announced there's going to be expansion or DLC. And one of the reasons why it works so well is that, again, the core gameplay loop of a single challenge in What the Golf is 20 to 30 seconds long. But the developers explore every possible inch of these mechanics and design to come up with new ways of challenging the player. So that once again, I am still manipulating the character the same way, the control scheme remains consistent, but what I am doing in this game changes based on challenge to challenge. And when you can keep the player guessing and keep them invested in it like that, that's going to do so much to get those very lengthy playthroughs out of a shorter gameplay loop. With that said, thank you so much for watching this video. Be sure to check out our Discord and Patreon link down below. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, take care. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.